girls and boys. Actually, I'll say Cheyenne and Alex and CJ. And we're so glad y'all are here. Let's say hi to anybody that might be watching us this morning. Say hello. We're glad you're here. Okay, guys, now we're just continuing on with our lessons about the early church and particularly about Paul. And you'll notice that last week we talked about crossing the finish line and fighting that good fight. And so we put this up last week to show the finish line. An athlete has the goal in mind. When he's out there running or she's out there running, their goal is to cross that finish line, right? Well, in this next unit, we've only got one more unit after this before we reach the end of our New Testament. But in this unit that we're doing right now, it's called Finishing Strong. So we know that the Olympics are going to be at the end of the month. What do you think those athletes are doing right now?
Training.
They're training. They're building up their strength and their resistance, aren't they? Do you think they're lazy?
No.
Do you think they're giving it all they got?
Yes.
Yes.
There's a game called Wipeout, and it's but Wipeout, you should play Wipeout 3. It's way easier.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that sometime, and maybe we'll figure out how we can use it in here, okay? So what we want to talk about today, though, is as we start our new unit, we want to see what we're going to be looking at. Finishing strong means when you're getting at the end of the race, you don't want to wimp out, do you? You don't want to fall short of finishing, going across that finish line. So we've got to have that strength. Sometimes runners, Cheyenne, you would know this, sometimes runners kind of reserve their strength a little bit because they know they're at the end. They're going to have to push to get ahead. So sometimes they'll kind of pace themselves.
When we were doing country, someone passed out right at the end.
You can do that because you're pushing so hard. So you have to condition yourself and you have to be in good shape in order to compete, don't you?
She was the first place runner too.
Oh wow, that's awful. That was awful for her, I'm sure. But that's what we don't want to happen to us as Christians. We don't want to faint right there at the finish, do we? We want to be strong even to the very end. And when we say the very end, what are we referring to? Alex?
I was going to tell you something and ask, what happens if you faint and when you fall you cross the finish line?
Well, then you're still across the finish line. So that's okay, but that you don't want that to happen either. Okay, let's look up here real quick. Okay, we've always got our big question. So this unit, our big question is, what will happen for all Christians in the future? Can you guess what that would be? What will happen for all Christians in the future? What's going to happen to us once we cross that finish line? What's next for us? When we cross that finish line, what's next?
Jesus, Jesus, and Jesus.
Very good. Jesus, Jesus, and Jesus. He's going to be there to meet us, isn't he? Okay, so let's look at the answer that the big question gives us. Everybody look up here, okay? I'm going to ask the question, you're going to answer it, okay? Can everybody see? It says, what will happen for all Christians in the future? Let's read that together. Everybody with me? One day, all Christians will see Jesus in his glory and live with him forever. Forever. How long is forever?
For infinity.
For infinity, it
Wait.
sure is.
Forever and space are kind of in common because they never end.
Exactly. Infinity
Wait, why
and
not
beyond.
make
Infinity
space?
and beyond, right?
Wait.
Okay. All right. So
You
now
can't go to infinity and beyond.
you can't go in. No, it is because there's no end to it, right? Okay. In today's lesson, we're going to be in Acts chapter 24 through 26, and we're going to see that Paul, at the end of his race, was willing to do hard things to share the gospel. And then we're going to talk about why whenever we get to that point too. We're going to see why Paul did that. So let me just kind of tell you what happened here in chapter 24. Now, the last time we saw Paul, we saw people want to kill him, okay? And so God had already showed Paul that he was going to be going to Rome. And so what happened, he ended up coming before rulers, and we see him in the picture here. Paul is actually talking to some rulers here. But how all this happened was that the people had plotted to kill Paul, and so this guy Lysias decided to protect Paul, and he got a band of Roman soldiers and took Paul to Caesarea so he would be safe there. And there Paul was a prisoner. Now Felix was the governor at the time, and so he had Paul come before him. Of course, the Jewish leaders were the accusers of Paul, and so they all came before Felix and had this trial. And during this trial, the Jewish leaders said all these lies and falsehoods about Paul, but Paul stood up for himself and denied all the accusations and was telling Felix about the faith that he had in Jesus. And so, so Festus kind of was a little bit crooked, I guess. He wanted a bribe from Paul, and Paul wouldn't give it to him, so he wanted to try to please the Jews. So instead of letting Paul go, he kept Paul in prison. Well, 2 years later, Paul was still in prison when Felix's time to be governor was over, and so a new governor named Festus came along. And so guess what happened?
What?
Festus wanted to talk to Paul. He actually, what had happened is when Festus, before he was on his way to Caesarea, the Jewish leaders came to Festus and accused Paul, and they wanted the governor Festus to have Paul come to Jerusalem because they still planned on killing Paul. But Paul actually had already appealed to go to Caesar because he knew that there was a plot to kill him, and he didn't want to go back to Jerusalem. So he had already, with Felix, he had already said he wanted to go to Caesar. And so when Festus became governor then, the Jews brought the same accusations against Paul. And so Festus says, I will try Paul in Caesarea. And so the Jewish leaders went there, and there was Paul, there was Festus the governor, Paul, and these Jewish leaders. And again, they were accusing Paul of all these things. And again, Paul defended himself. But in this meeting with Festus, Paul also defended the faith. He said that he was a Jewish leader, that he had believed in Jesus, had found out about the resurrection, and was following what had been promised in the Old Testament about the Messiah. So he kind of rebuked all the things that all the accusers had said against him. So Festus wasn't sure what to do with him. So King Agrippa, who was over the governor Festus, he and his wife Bernice came to Caesarea, and so Festus told King Agrippa about Paul. So Agrippa wanted to see Paul as well. So they had another trial, and so Paul was able to stand up and defend himself. But he not only defended himself, but he defended what he knew for the Bible to be true. He talked about Jesus' resurrection. He talked about how he had been saved. Y'all remember the story about how Paul was saved? What road was he on when he was saved? When Paul was saved?
I don't remember, but a sunlight road.
Absolutely. He was on the road to Damascus. What was he going to do when he got to Damascus?
Persecute the Christians.
He was going to persecute the Christians. And like CJ said, that light shone down from heaven. Who was that light?
Jesus.
It was Jesus. And Jesus spoke to Paul, who was Saul at the time.
No, it was Pluto.
Huh?
No, it was Pluto.
Oh, no. Anyway, so then Paul listened to the voice, and he became a believer in Jesus Christ. And God had shown him that he was going to suffer great things for him, that he was going to take this new gospel message to the Gentiles and to the Jews and to kings. And so he knew what his destiny was from the very beginning. And so Paul was agreeable to what God had in store for him. So while he was talking to King Agrippa, though, King Agrippa interrupted him and said, Paul, you're out of your mind. And Paul said, no, I'm not out of my mind. What I am saying is agreeable. It is something that's reasonable and that should be listened to. So anyway, as it turned out, Paul had already appealed to go to Caesar. And so afterward, King Agrippa told Festus that had Paul not appealed to go to Caesar, then he would have been set free. Instead, Agrippa says to Paul, you want to go to Caesar you will go. And so that's what happened to Paul. And next week we're going to see what happened on that trip to Rome. Okay, so now what we want to look at real quick is, how strong was Paul?
That was a question. When he was Saul, he was like big and strong when he persecuted Christians, right? But when he turned into Paul, was he still like that?
Yes. See, his personality was the same, wasn't it? And see, God creates, if you look at your personality, you are not much different than you were years ago, and you won't be a whole lot different than you are years from now. Now, what God does in our life when we let Him be our Savior is He fine-tunes us. He helps us to go the right way. He helps take out the sharp edges, the things that are wrong in us, and He produces something in us that's good. And that's what He did with Paul, but that's a good point you make, CJ. Now, this is what I want us to look at. How hard was it for Paul to stand before kings? Do you think on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think? What do you think? How hard was it for him to stand before kings?
Hard.
Yeah. Do you think so? Okay. Let me ask you another question. Why did Paul do what he did? Why did Paul stand before these kings and give his testimony and even talk to them about their own salvation? Why do you think he did that?
Because it was the right thing to do.
Right. And where do you think Paul got that right thing to do? It came from Jesus, didn't it? Paul was on fire for Jesus. We talked about this a few minutes ago. You know, the Olympics are going to be at the end of the month. Those athletes that are training right now, are they lazy? Are they lazy? No. Are they taking this seriously?
Yes.
Are they doing their best?
Yes.
Yes. So that's what Paul's telling us here, is that life can be hard sometimes, but we are supposed to do our best no matter what and trust God. And so we'll be talking about that in just a few more minutes. But what we want to get out of this is that what mattered to Paul was what mattered to Jesus. God had given Paul his destiny. He had given him his job. And did Paul do it?
Yes.
And did he do it well?
Yes.
Did he do it with passion and with heart?
Yes.
Or was he just dutiful? You know, sometimes people do things just because they have to. Did Paul do this because he wanted to?
No.
Actually, he did. He wanted to stand up for the Lord, and he wanted for the Lord to use him wherever he put him. And so Paul's heart was right in with what God was doing, wasn't it? And so we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. Let's go ahead and say goodbye for those that might be tuning in. Y'all want to turn around and say goodbye with me?
Bye.
Okay? Bye. Thanks for tuning in. God bless you. Bye-bye.